Stop right there. Do not move.
Excuse me. This is my home. Who are you?
Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You need to come with us now.
Do you have a warrant? You are on my private property.
Turn around. Hands behind your back. Now.
Mommy!
It was 7:43 on a Tuesday morning when security cameras at the residence captured something that would shock the entire nation. A 36-year-old black female lawyer named Vanessa Carter was pulling out of her own garage, dressed in a professional suit, on her way to court to represent a client at an important hearing. She had barely pulled her car into her driveway when a black Suburban blocked her exit. Two ICE agents jumped out of the vehicle, armed and wearing tactical vests. They didn't knock on her door. They didn't ask to speak politely. They simply demanded she get out of the car and submit to detention. What these agents didn't know is that every inch of Vanessa's property was covered by 4K security cameras, and what was captured in the next 20 minutes would become irrefutable evidence in one of the most significant federal lawsuits against abuse of authority in recent years. Before we dive into this absolutely insane story, tell me something. Where are you watching this from? Right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button because stories like this can't be forgotten. They need to be told, shared, shouted for the world to hear. You won't want to miss a second of what happens next. This is one of those stories that proves reality is sometimes more absurd than any fiction. Vanessa Carter wasn't just any lawyer. She was an immigration law and civil rights specialist with an impressive track record of victories against federal agencies that abused their power. Over the past 8 years, she had won 73 of the 84 cases she took on, saving families from unjust deportation, challenging illegal detentions, and forcing ICE to follow its own regulations. She wasn't just good at what she did. She was feared by federal agents who knew she knew the law better than they did, that she didn't back down when confronted with intimidation, and that she documented absolutely everything. Vanessa was born in Chicago, daughter of teachers, grew up in a home where education and justice were fundamental values. She graduated from Northwestern University Law School, worked as a public defender for 5 years before opening her own office specializing in immigration cases. For the past 3 months, Vanessa had been particularly busy with a high-profile case. She was representing a Guatemalan family that had been separated during an ICE operation that was later determined to be illegal. The operation had been conducted without proper warrants, with agents entering private property without permission, detaining people without probable cause. Vanessa had filed a class action lawsuit, not just seeking compensation for her client, but also demanding systemic changes in ICE operations in the region. The case was gaining media attention. Journalists were covering it, politicians were making statements, and ICE was getting increasingly nervous about the negative exposure. Vanessa had received veiled threats. Nothing explicit enough to report to police, but subtle comments from ICE agents during hearings, intimidating looks in courthouse hallways, strange calls to her office late at night, where the person on the other end just breathed and hung up. She didn't let it intimidate her. In fact, it only made her more determined. She had installed comprehensive security cameras around her home 6 weeks earlier, not because she was paranoid, but because she was strategic. If something happened, she wanted to have irrefutable proof. That decision would become the difference between her word against theirs and having 4K video evidence that couldn't be disputed. On that Tuesday morning, Vanessa was prepared for what would be a normal day. She had woken up at 6:30, showered, dressed in a professional navy blue suit, reviewed her case documents while having coffee. She had to be in court at 9 o'clock for a preliminary hearing. She left home at 7:40, exactly as planned. Her garage opened automatically. She got into her 2022 Toyota Camry and started backing down the driveway. That's when the black Suburban appeared out of nowhere, completely blocking her exit. The security cameras captured the exact moment. You can see Vanessa looking in the rearview mirror, confused about why a vehicle had stopped like that. You can see her putting the car in neutral, waiting for the vehicle to move. Then the Suburban's doors opened and 2 men wearing tactical vests with ICE letters jumped out. One of them, who would later be identified as Agent Marcus Webb, a 12-year veteran, immediately started shouting orders for Vanessa to exit the vehicle. She rolled down the driver's side window, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel, and calmly asked what was happening. Webb said she was being detained and needed to get out immediately. Vanessa, using her legal training, asked under what authority she was being detained and if they had a warrant. The second agent, identified as Eric Dalton, circled to the passenger side of her car. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. The security cameras captured everything from multiple angles. The front house camera showed the complete scene. The garage camera captured facial expressions. The driveway camera showed the ICE vehicle blocking the exit. Every second was being documented in crystal clear quality. Webb became more aggressive when Vanessa didn't immediately comply. He said she was obstructing a federal investigation by refusing to cooperate. Vanessa, maintaining the calm that only years of courtroom experience could provide, responded that she wasn't refusing to cooperate. She was exercising her constitutional rights by asking them to provide a legal basis for her detention. The situation escalated quickly when Webb decided Vanessa was taking too long to comply. He pulled the driver's door handle, trying to force it open, but Vanessa had locked all the doors as soon as she saw the agents jump from the Suburban. She kept her hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Her voice remained calm but firm as she repeated her questions. "Do you have an arrest warrant with my name? Do you have probable cause to detain me? What is the nature of this investigation?" The security cameras captured every word perfectly. The audio system was picking up everything with crystal clarity. Webb was getting visibly frustrated. He wasn't used to being questioned. Most times when ICE approached people, especially immigrants or people of color, they were too terrified to ask questions. They just complied out of fear of deportation or violence. But Vanessa wasn't an immigrant. She was an American citizen born in Chicago. She was a lawyer who knew the law better than the agents themselves, and she wasn't intimidated. Dalton, on the passenger side, started banging on the window with his fist. He shouted that if she didn't open the door in 5 seconds, they would break it. Vanessa looked directly at him through the glass and said something that would be quoted in dozens of news articles later. "If you break my window or force me out of this vehicle without a warrant or without telling me why I'm being detained, I will sue both of you personally and guarantee your careers end today." This is being recorded on multiple cameras with audio and video. Every second of your illegality is being documented. So think very carefully about what you do next. The absolute confidence in her voice, the legal precision of her words made Dalton hesitate. He looked at Webb, uncertain. You could see on the security cameras the moment where both agents realized they had potentially made a serious mistake. But instead of backing down, instead of admitting they might have approached the wrong person or in the wrong way, they doubled down. Webb pulled his radio and called for backup, claiming they had an uncooperative suspect who was resisting detention. The way he said it made Vanessa sound dangerous, as if she was doing something beyond sitting in her own car, in her own driveway, asking legitimate questions about her rights. Vanessa immediately activated the video recording function on her cell phone, placing it in the dashboard mount where it could capture the car's interior and through the windshield. She was creating multiple sources of evidence: the external security cameras, her phone capturing from inside. Everything was being documented from every possible angle. While waiting for backup, Vanessa used those precious minutes to do something smart. She activated the phone's voice command and called her office partner, Marcus Thompson, putting it on speakerphone. Marcus answered immediately. Vanessa calmly explained the situation. She said it was approximately 7:47 in the morning, that she was in her car in her own driveway, that 2 ICE agents had blocked her exit and were demanding she get out of the vehicle, that they hadn't presented a warrant or explained probable cause for detention, and that she was documenting everything. Marcus, who was also a civil rights attorney with 20 years of experience, immediately understood the gravity. He told the agents through the phone, loud enough for them to hear, that Vanessa Carter was an American citizen, a licensed attorney, who was on her private property, and that any attempt to detain her without a warrant or probable cause would constitute false arrest and civil rights violations. Webb approached the driver's window and shouted for Vanessa to hang up the phone. She refused, saying she had the right to legal counsel during any interaction with law enforcement. Marcus, still on the phone, started asking specific questions to the agents. He asked for their names and badge, ICA numbers. He asked which agency specifically they represented. He asked if they had an arrest warrant signed by a judge. He asked what crime Vanessa was being accused of committing. Webb refused to answer any of these questions, just repeating that Vanessa needed to exit the vehicle immediately. The lack of specific answers, combined with the agents' growing aggressiveness, was making it obvious they had no legal basis for what they were doing. This was starting to look less like a legitimate law enforcement operation and more like targeted intimidation. The security cameras captured the arrival of 2 additional ICE vehicles approximately 8 minutes later. 4 more agents exited, all armed, all wearing tactical gear. Now there were 6 federal agents surrounding 1 unarmed woman's car in her own driveway. The escalation was absurd and clearly excessive. One of the newly arrived agents, a supervisor named Captain Frank Morrison, with 23 years of service, approached the driver's window. He tried a different approach, his voice calmer, more professional. He introduced himself and politely asked Vanessa to exit the vehicle so they could discuss the situation. Vanessa, maintaining her composure, responded that she would be happy to discuss anything they needed, but first needed to know why she was being detained and see any legal documentation authorizing her detention. Morrison hesitated. The cameras captured the exact moment where he realized his subordinates had created a significant mess. He whispered something to Webb, who became visibly defensive. You could see through body language that there was a discussion about how they had reached this point. Morrison then turned his attention back to Vanessa and said something surprising. He said they were investigating suspicious activities related to her case against ICE, that they had information suggesting she might be involved in helping clients evade detention, and that they needed to ask some questions. Vanessa, even in the stressful situation, almost laughed. She pointed out the immediate absurdity. Helping clients exercise their legal rights wasn't evading detention. It was the literal definition of being a lawyer. And even if they had real suspicions, proper procedure would be a subpoena or scheduling an interview through appropriate channels, not ambushing a lawyer at her home at 7 a.m. Marcus Thompson, still on speakerphone, immediately identified what Morrison had just done. He had inadvertently admitted this wasn't a detention based on suspected immigration violation or any real crime. It was retaliation. They were targeting Vanessa specifically because she was suing ICE and winning. Marcus stated this out loud so everyone could hear, and so it would be recorded on all cameras. You just admitted you're detaining my colleague attorney in retaliation for her doing her job of representing clients against your agency. This isn't just illegal, it's a grotesque violation of constitutional rights. You're finished. Every one of you will be named personally in the federal lawsuit we'll file by end of day today. Morrison realized his mistake immediately. His expression changed from confident professional to someone who had just realized he had just destroyed his own career on camera. The dynamic was shifting rapidly. The other agents started exchanging nervous glances. They had shown up thinking they were supporting a legitimate law enforcement operation. But now it was becoming clear that Webb and Dalton had initiated something without proper authorization. And Morrison had made it worse by admitting retaliatory motivation. Vanessa seized this moment of uncertainty. She looked directly at Morrison through the car window and made a simple offer. You have 2 options. Option 1, you leave my property immediately, and I consider not adding each of you personally to the lawsuit I'm already going to file. Option 2, you continue this illegal farce, possibly arrest me without cause, and I guarantee every second of what happens next will be used as evidence to destroy not just your careers, but to demonstrate a pattern of institutional retaliation against civil rights attorneys. You have 30 seconds to decide. The countdown was brutal. You could see on the security cameras the agents getting increasingly uncomfortable. Some started backing toward their vehicles. A younger agent who had arrived with the reinforcements and clearly had no idea what was happening when he was called was visibly wanting to be anywhere but there. Morrison tried to salvage the situation by asking Vanessa to be reasonable, that they could work this out as professionals. Vanessa cut him off immediately. Professionals don't ambush lawyers at their homes. Professionals don't block driveways with 6 armed agents. Professionals don't admit retaliatory motivation on camera. You lost any claim to professionalism the moment you decided to do this. Now, leave my property or be removed by local authorities for trespassing. Webb tried to argue they had federal authority that superseded private property. Marcus, still on speakerphone, laughed and explained that federal authority didn't include the right to detain citizens without probable cause, that the Fourth Amendment still applied to federal agents, and that they were violating multiple federal and state laws at that exact moment. Then something happened that nobody expected. A neighbor of Vanessa's, a 67-year-old retired man named Robert Chen, who lived 3 houses down, had seen the commotion and called Atlanta police. 2 Atlanta police cruisers arrived, and 2 officers exited, clearly confused about what they were seeing. 6 federal agents surrounding a woman's car in a residential driveway. The senior officer, Sergeant James Rodriguez, with 15 years of service, approached Morrison and asked what the situation was. Morrison tried to explain they were conducting a federal investigation and had everything under control. Rodriguez didn't look convinced. He walked to Vanessa's car window and asked if she was okay and if she wanted these men off her property. Vanessa said yes, she absolutely wanted them gone, that she had repeatedly asked them to provide legal basis for her detention, and they refused, and that she believed she was being targeted in retaliation for suing ICE in a civil rights case. Rodriguez turned to Morrison with an expression that made clear what he thought about the entire situation. He said he didn't care if they were feds or aliens from outer space. If the property owner wanted them off her private property and they didn't have a warrant, they needed to leave, or he'd start arresting people for trespassing. Morrison tried to pull federal hierarchy, but Rodriguez wasn't impressed. He pointed out that private property was private property, that constitutional rights were constitutional rights, and that if ICE had a legitimate case against Vanessa, they could get a warrant from a judge like everyone else. Morrison realized he had completely lost. He said something into his radio, and the agents started returning to their vehicles. Webb was visibly furious, slamming the Suburban's door hard. Dalton looked mostly relieved to be leaving before the situation got even worse. The ICE vehicles exited the property slowly, almost reluctantly, like children, being forced to leave after losing a fight. Rodriguez remained until all federal vehicles had departed, then returned to Vanessa's window. He apologized on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department for any stress she had experienced and said she should definitely file a formal complaint about what had just happened. He provided his business card and said he'd be happy to provide a statement as a witness if needed. Vanessa thanked him, her voice finally showing some of the tension she had been keeping under control for the past 25 minutes. She waited until the Atlanta police had also departed before finally getting out of her car. Her legs were shaking when she stood up. All the adrenaline she had been suppressing during the confrontation hit her at once. She leaned against the car, breathing deeply, processing what had just happened. Marcus was still on the phone. He asked if she was okay. She said she was physically unharmed but emotionally shaken and completely furious. Marcus said he would come pick her up immediately, that she shouldn't drive while so upset, and that they needed to start documenting everything while it was fresh. Marcus Thompson arrived at Vanessa's house 20 minutes later, bringing with him 2 other lawyers from their office and a technology specialist to help download and preserve all security footage. Vanessa led them inside, where she finally allowed the emotions she had been suppressing to come out. She cried from anger, from fear, from pure outrage about what had happened. She was an experienced attorney who had faced hundreds of federal agents in court, but having 6 of them surrounding her car and her own home, threatening her without legal basis, was a violation of her safety and dignity that cut deeply. Marcus let her process, then gently guided her through the documentation process. They needed to capture every detail while her memory was fresh. Vanessa spent the next 2 hours giving a detailed statement, timing every event, describing every word exchanged, identifying every agent by name when possible, or by physical characteristics when not. The technology specialist, a man named David Park, who had worked on dozens of civil rights cases, extracted all recordings from Vanessa's security system. There were 7 different cameras that had captured the incident from various angles. The front house camera, the garage camera, 2 driveway cameras, the side yard camera. Even the doorbell camera showed part of the action. David copied everything to multiple backup drives, creating a chain of custody that would ensure the recordings would be admissible as evidence in court. He also retrieved the recording from Vanessa's phone that had captured the car's interior and the speakerphone conversation with Marcus. When everything was compiled, they had over 40 minutes of footage from multiple angles showing the entire confrontation from beginning to end. It was devastating and irrefutable evidence. While the technical work was happening, the other lawyers started researching legal precedents and drafting lawsuit strategy. They identified at least 7 distinct legal violations that had occurred that morning. First, illegal detention without probable cause. Second, Fourth Amendment rights violation against unreasonable search and seizure. Third, private property trespass. Fourth, retaliation against an attorney for exercising her right to represent clients. Fifth, witness intimidation in a pending federal case. Sixth, excessive use of force by sending 6 armed agents against 1 unarmed woman. Seventh, conspiracy to violate civil rights. Each of these violations carried potential civil liability for both individual agents and the agency. The legal team was building what would be one of the most comprehensive and documented civil rights lawsuits in recent years. Vanessa eventually calmed down enough to make strategic decisions about what to do next. Her first inclination was to keep this private, handle it through proper legal channels, avoid making it a media circus. But Marcus convinced her otherwise. He argued that the more public this became, the harder it would be for ILACE to sweep under the rug or retaliate further. Transparency was protection. If millions of people knew what had happened, it would be much harder for something accidental to happen to Vanessa. She reluctantly agreed. They needed to tell the story before ICE could create its own narrative. They called Patricia Miller, the same Atlanta Journal-Constitution journalist who had covered the supermarket case months earlier. Patricia arrived in less than an hour, bringing a videographer and producer. When they showed her the security footage, she was speechless. She had covered police misconduct for 15 years and had never seen anything so blatant, so well documented. The story aired on the evening local news at 6 p.m., just 11 hours after the incident had occurred. The headline was, "Civil Rights Attorney Illegally Detained at Home by ICE Agents in Retaliation for Lawsuit." The segment included an interview with Vanessa, clips from security, footage showing agents surrounding her car, audio of Morrison's admission about investigating related to her case, and legal analysis from outside experts confirming what had happened was completely illegal. The story exploded. Within an hour, it was being shared on social media. Within 2 hours, other news stations were calling, asking to do their own stories. Within 3 hours, it was being discussed nationally. The video of Vanessa sitting calmly in her car while 6 armed agents surrounded her, maintaining her composure while citing the law and demanding her rights, resonated with millions of people who were fed up with seeing federal agencies abuse their power. Civil rights organizations spoke out immediately. The ACLU issued a statement condemning ICE's actions and offering full support for Vanessa's case. The National Lawyers Guild, an organization of progressive attorneys, called this one of the most flagrant examples of government retaliation against a lawyer they had seen in decades. The American Bar Association, which rarely commented on specific cases, issued a rare statement saying they were deeply concerned about what appeared to be coordinated intimidation of a licensed bar member. Politicians started weighing in. 3 Democratic congressmen demanded immediate investigations. Georgia's state attorney general announced his office would conduct its own review to determine if state laws had been violated. Even some Republicans, usually defenders of strict immigration enforcement, expressed discomfort with what the videos showed. There was something about seeing an American citizen, a lawyer, being surrounded in her own home that crossed partisan lines. IOCE was forced to respond quickly to the growing controversy. Their initial statement was weak and defensive, saying they took all allegations of misconduct seriously and would conduct a full internal review. But the public wasn't interested in internal reviews. People wanted real and immediate accountability. The videos were too clear, too documented to be explained away with bureaucratic jargon. You could see exactly what had happened. There was no ambiguity. There was no, he said, she said. There were just high-definition recordings of federal agents admitting retaliation while surrounding an unarmed attorney. Within 24 hours of the incident, Webb and Dalton were placed on administrative leave. Morrison was suspended without pay pending investigation. The ICE regional director in Atlanta was called to an emergency meeting with superiors in Washington. The public pressure was too intense to be ignored. The federal lawsuit was officially filed 72 hours after the incident, moving with almost unprecedented speed for a civil rights case. Vanessa and her legal team named not just Webb, Dalton, and Morrison personally, but also 3 other agents who had participated in surrounding the car, the ICE regional director, and the Department of Homeland Security as a whole. The lawsuit sought $15 million in compensatory and punitive damages, but more important than money were the policy changes it demanded. The lawsuit demanded a complete review of ICE protocols for approaching attorneys, mandatory training on retaliation and witness intimidation, creation of an independent oversight system to investigate complaints against agents, and permanent dismissal of any agents involved in the incident. The initial petition was 89 pages and included complete transcripts of security recordings, frame-by-frame video analysis, and citations of dozens of legal precedents establishing that what had happened was flagrantly illegal. The federal government's response was initially to try to dismiss the case claiming sovereign and qualified immunity, arguing that federal agents couldn't be sued for actions taken in the course of their official duties. But Vanessa's legal team demolished these arguments by showing that qualified immunity doesn't apply when agents violate clearly established rights, and that it certainly doesn't apply when agents admit on video they're acting in retaliation. The federal judge assigned to the case, Judge Helena Martinez, an appointee with a reputation for being tough but fair, reviewed the initial materials and did something notable at the first hearing. She watched segments of the security footage in open court, with Vanessa, defense lawyers, and a gallery full of journalists and civil rights advocates present. When the videos ended, she looked directly at government lawyers and said she was deeply disturbed by what she had seen. She denied the immunity motion and ordered the case to proceed to full discovery. The discovery phase was brutal for the government. Vanessa's team issued subpoenas for everything: personnel records of all involved agents, internal emails from the ICE office discussing her and her case, radio communication recordings from the day of the incident, training policies related to interactions with attorneys, statistics on how many times ICE had approached lawyers who were suing them. What emerged from discovery was even more damaging than the original incident. Internal emails showed Webb had specifically asked permission from supervisors to apply pressure on Vanessa. A supervisor had responded saying to be careful, but that sending a message to lawyers who cause problems wouldn't be a bad thing. There was an email chain discussing whether they should try to intimidate her into dropping the Guatemalan family's case. All of this was documented. All of this showed not just that individual agents had acted badly, but that there was institutional support for retaliation. Personnel records revealed concerning patterns. Webb had 7 previous complaints of aggressive conduct, including 2 from lawyers who alleged intimidation. None had resulted in serious discipline. Dalton had failed anger management assessments twice, but was kept on active duty. Morrison, the supervisor, had a history of covering up subordinate misconduct, with 3 previous internal investigations where he was found to have failed to properly report violations. The picture emerging was of a culture within that ICE office where aggression was rewarded, oversight was weak, and retaliation against lawyers who challenged the agency was tolerated, if not encouraged. Depositions began 6 months after the initial incident. Webb was deposed first, and his testimony was disastrous for the defense. Under oath, he contradicted previous statements multiple times. He claimed not to remember specific details that were clearly captured on video. When confronted with the videos, he tried to argue they didn't show the full context, but couldn't explain what context was missing. Dalton did slightly better, but still damaged the government's case by admitting they had no real evidence of wrongdoing on Vanessa's part, that the approach had been based on concerns about her legal activism, and that, in retrospect, maybe they shouldn't have blocked her driveway. Morrison was the most problematic witness for the government. During his 7-hour deposition, he was forced to admit he knew Webb had prior complaints, but kept him on field duty anyway. He admitted none of the agents had a warrant or court order when they went to Vanessa's home. He admitted his references to investigating her activities related to the case were because supervisors were concerned she was being too effective in her representation. Each admission was worse than the last. Vanessa's lawyers had to hide their smiles as Morrison essentially built their entire case with his own testimony. As the lawsuit progressed, Vanessa's life had become simultaneously more difficult and more impactful. She had become an involuntary public figure, recognized on the streets, invited to speak at conferences, interviewed on podcasts and news programs. Part of her hated the attention, just wanted to get back to her quiet work of representing clients. But another part understood her platform could now be used to expose systemic problems and help others facing similar intimidation. She started receiving contacts from other immigration attorneys across the entire country, many sharing their own stories of ICE intimidation and harassment. Some had been followed from court. Others had received questionable subpoenas for client records. Some had been subjected to random practice inspections with suspicious frequency. What Vanessa had experienced wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a national pattern of immigration agencies, trying to intimidate legal representation that made their work harder. Vanessa began collecting these stories, documenting them, connecting affected attorneys to each other. She helped form a network of immigration rights lawyers who supported each other, shared strategies for dealing with intimidation, and collectively pushed for policy changes. Her case became a rallying point for a larger national conversation about how federal agencies treated legal dissent and whether attorneys should fear retaliation for doing their job too well. Academic articles were written analyzing the case. Law schools began using it in curricula on professional ethics and courage under pressure. Vanessa hadn't asked to become a symbol, but understood the responsibility that came with it. If her case could make things slightly safer for the next attorney who challenged ICE, then it was worth all the stress and exposure. The trial was scheduled to begin 14 months after the initial incident, but 3 weeks before the trial date, something significant happened that would change the trajectory of the entire case. The Department of Justice made a substantial settlement offer 3 weeks before trial. The offer included $8.5 million for Vanessa, but money was only part of what made the settlement significant. The federal government agreed to implement policy changes throughout ICE nationally. Every agent would be required to complete 120 hours of training on constitutional rights, focusing on how to interact with attorneys. Any agent approaching a lawyer representing clients against ICE would have to obtain prior approval and document legal justification. An independent oversight office would be created to investigate retaliation against attorneys, and Webb, Dalton, and Morrison would be permanently fired with certifications revoked. Vanessa spent days reviewing terms, ensuring changes were binding. The hardest decision wasn't about money, but whether settlement would leave issues unresolved. A trial could establish stronger legal precedent, but would mean months or years consumed by the case, reliving trauma repeatedly. After discussions with her team and family, Vanessa accepted the settlement, not because it was easier, but because policy changes would have immediate impact. The settlement was announced at a press conference that attracted national media. Vanessa explained that while money couldn't undo the violation, the changes meant future attorneys would have protections that didn't exist before. She talked about how the case was never just about her, but about every lawyer intimidated for defending clients vigorously, about ensuring our legal system worked without attorneys fearing retaliation. Webb, Dalton, and Morrison lost their careers permanently. Webb tried to appeal through the federal union, but with videos, internal emails, and his own testimony against him, there was no defense. His appeal was denied in 3 weeks. He tried to find work in private security, but his name was tainted. Google search brought up dozens of articles with videos of him, yelling at an unarmed attorney. No respectable employer wanted that liability. Dalton disappeared from public life, moving to another state. Morrison faced the hardest fall, from captain with 20 years to unemployed and radioactive in the industry. He gave an interview trying to position himself as scapegoat, claiming he followed institutional culture. He was partially right about systemic problems, but wrong to think it absolved him of personal responsibility. The Atlanta ICE office underwent complete restructuring. The regional director was transferred, 3 supervisors demoted, 17 agents mandatorily retrained. The culture of unchecked aggression and tolerated retaliation was officially recognized and addressed. Whether this would change long-term behavior or just make agents more careful about getting caught remained to be seen. But there were now mechanisms for accountability. Vanessa's case became one of the most cited in jurisprudence on government retaliation against attorneys. It was taught in law schools as an example of proper documentation and professional courage. The video of her refusing intimidation, citing law while surrounded by armed agents, was viewed millions of times, inspiring law students who wanted to do social justice work. Vanessa used part of the settlement to expand her practice, hiring 2 lawyers focused on government retaliation and misconduct. She created a nonprofit foundation providing free legal support for attorneys facing intimidation for representing immigration clients. The foundation offered training on documenting encounters with federal agencies, rights when approached, and how to respond to retaliation. In the first 2 years, it helped 43 attorneys across the country facing various degrees of intimidation. Having a network ready to respond immediately proved effective in de-escalating situations and ensuring agencies knew there would be consequences. The security cameras that captured the incident are still at Vanessa's house. She maintains them and added more, saying hope isn't a security strategy. Documentation is protection. Other attorneys followed her example, installing comprehensive systems, creating cloud records, preparing for effective work, potentially making them targets. It's sad reality that attorneys defending the vulnerable must take such precautions. Vanessa continues taking immigration cases, some against ICE itself. She still faces federal agents in court. But now there's tacit understanding. Agents know who she is, what happened, that she won't be intimidated, documents everything, and retaliation will cost careers. The lesson goes beyond individual rights or law enforcement reform. It's about the value of irrefutable evidence when truth is disputed. The cameras transformed word against word into clear documentation. It's about knowing rights and having courage to exercise them when armed authorities demand obedience. It's about transparency, making injustice public so it can't be swept away. And it's about a lawyer who just wanted to go to work, but became a symbol of resistance to abuse of power. Vanessa never asked for that role, but assumed it with determination, transforming trauma into change that would protect others. Sometimes justice prevails, and when it prevails, it should be documented, celebrated, and used as foundation to continue fighting for a system where rights are respected, power is checked, and attorneys can defend clients without fearing retaliation.